Hello, I'm Robert Priest at Art Design Cafe. There was a level of interest in my first podcast that I wasn't expecting. So I'm doing a follow-up audio quickly to help some people move along in their interest in the Nazi history of Philip Johnson. There are a couple of key initial steps I want to point out. First, the historical narratives by Schulze and Lamster need to be pulled apart with a focus on their sources and any assessment phrasing by year. And I think I'm thinking of more of a report initially by year and at key times by month for that to fill in the gaps or to see the gaps of information when really after 1932 when Johnson has turned Nazi. In addition to these book sources, I'd layer on the FBI report information from there and noting the sources. And also noting that some of these things are allegations for that. So, they're allegations. So it's best to get two other sources at least to confirm something. And then I'd maybe add Johnson's accounts of things. So line things up. It's an investigation. Think of it that way. So the subject Johnson says things which may be true or may not be. That's just like in a case, and the same goes for others for that. So we hear lots of things and we're trying to figure it out. For starters, I want to know when Johnson was in and out of the United States. Now that can be found in the Ancestry database, in the passenger list and naturalization section, the immigration records. Some university students and academics may have access to that section already or not. I checked one university that had Ancestry. It wasn't listed, but I do know of another library that has it on site for that. Plus there's the presumably the online version, which someone needs to subscribe to. Is all of this information about him going in and out of Europe in the years he was there consistent with Johnson's accounts? Is kind of a key question. And I'd also maybe try to scan who else is on the ships, if any names stick out. I'd be looking for a range because you never know, a range of people because you never know who he might have been interacting with. So who is he traveling with, and who also basically is around the ship for that, if they're interesting names. For example, if Mrs. Lawrence Lanier-Winslow, her name is Aileen Winslow, is on the ship when Philip is, that's interesting. Maybe they didn't like each other, or maybe they did. If George Sylvester Viereck is on the ship as well. But initially, you want to see if he's traveling with anyone. I think we will find a couple of new finds that way, possibly, for this. And I want to see that Johnson didn't go to Germany as alleged in 1940. I'm not sure how he'd have done that as the war had begun, maybe through Lisbon. I mean, I doubt he would have gone through San Francisco to Japan and Russia. But I checked 1940 just to cover that. Because if it pops up, and that didn't pop up before, that becomes wildly interesting. What was he then doing in 1940? Now, I want to read you a letter where this comes up. And it's right in the FBI report that is on archive.org. It's linked at the bottom of this YouTube podcast page. And it's the fourth page in the FBI file dated June 1st, 1940. It's called Anonymous Communication. And it has an envelope postmarked out of Cleveland. Now, I think you all know, okay, just because it's postmarked out of Cleveland doesn't mean the person is in Cleveland. This is a very sensitive situation. And so, it could be, for example, someone from New London that happened to mail it when the next time they were in Cleveland. So kind of keep an open mind. So what we know is that it was postmarked in Cleveland, and that's all we know. So, dear sir, I wish to report Philip Johnson, son of Homer H. Johnson, who was a lawyer in Cleveland, Ohio, for being disloyal to the United States, because for years he has been working for communism and all the other isms, and has been to Europe several times for this purpose. When Germany conquered Norway, he jumped up and down and sang, "Hooray, hooray," or "Hurrah, hurrah," for the Nazis, we won. Okay, so if we look back at this, it sounds like they heard this from someone else. So is it true, is it not true? Next paragraph. Since the latest developments of the war, this, I believe, should be reported. At the present time, he is at their summer home, his parents, in New London, Ohio, and I just learned that he intends going to Germany around June 1st. So the letter is dated June 1st, and he intends to go to Germany around June 1st. This anonymous communication or person says for that. So that's why I want to know why he's in 1940. If he's if he ends up in Europe for that, because it doesn't come out through the other sources today, as I recall, if I recall correctly, and this person is claiming this may be happening for that. So if it doesn't show up in the travel record, then this is kind of nulled out, perhaps, or maybe he wanted to go and decided not to. Continuing with the letter. His people are good citizens of the United States, and his sister is helping the refugees in France and Belgium, but he is mesmerized by this evil that is trying to overpower the good in the world. His people feel very bad but cannot say anything. So let's assume this letter is legitimate. So it sounds like a friend of the family, maybe, or the maid, or something like that. If we're assuming it's legitimate. And then continuing with the letter. If I give my name and it is known, it will cause several people the loss of their positions and a great deal of trouble. Therefore, I am withholding it. However, I am a loyal American citizen. Now, if we think about, it's typed, so the person, and it's spelled correctly. That's another possible clue in this. And this was sent to J. Edgar Hoover, FBI. There a lot of people were sending things, sometimes a little bit off. They read something in the newspaper and they thought they'd offer their take or worry about something. But this is just very interesting. So I want to know, in the ancestry record, is Philip Johnson, did he go to Europe? And I'd be looking for Philip Johnson. There probably are a few. So, there could be false Philip Johnsons, if you will. I'd also look at P.C. Johnson as well. And again, who is he traveling with? Because if it's someone, say, like Viereck or Auhagen, that is, I think, big. And it says that, it would say to me the fact that it didn't come out forward, that more was going on. Or maybe, this is just a false letter or a false claim. Unintentionally, hopefully. I also want to see that Philip actually didn't visit Germany at any time in 1936. I don't think he did. I'm referring to Chips Channon, who I mentioned in the first podcast for that, his apparent friend in London from the Midwest who was at the Olympics and partied with the Nazis. This happened, now the Olympics were from August 1st to 16th, 1936. The Social Justice Conference with Coughlin was in Cleveland from the 14th to the 16th, so the end of the Olympic timing. Now, I think it took some time, if you wanted to get from Cleveland to Berlin, 3, 4, 5 days. But, Johnson was driven, so we can imagine if he wanted to be there, in the beginning, he would have. And he had the money to pay for the fastest travel possible for that. So again, I just scrolled through some of my notes for Cleveland. Nothing came up. Blackburn is there, and he's speaking, and he's photographed. But I didn't see anything specifically with Philip Johnson at the conference. He probably was there. Another source will pull that up. But there is an overlap. I just get a sense that, again, that if Philip Johnson could be there and he had the money to do it, he would be there. So I want to just kind of look at this to cross this off the list. So with the ancestry data, we can nail down when he was in Europe, when he arrived, and when he left, and maybe get confirmation of where he was. There may be passport applications, emergency passport replacement applications, and where those took place. And I wonder if any records are yet available easily on crossing borders in European countries. So that would be, for example, the Netherlands to Germany, France to Germany. I kind of and what I do is Germany is always of interest. Berlin is particularly of interest, but Paris becomes of interest as well, for I think obvious reasons soon enough. Then I'd want to compare Johnson's accounts and what's already known or nailed down to see if anything is inconsistent. And if something pops up, then I'm going to look at that more, because that wasn't put forward by him, I think. So if anyone wants to dig in, in the short term, I've got some things I have to focus on for a little bit. If they, feel free to send any data you might find. My email is artdesigncafe@gmail.com. And people are also welcome to send any documentation anonymously, but I may ask questions about that documentation because we want to make sure that it's solid. So, as we begin to look more critically at Johnson, it may be helpful to make files or put on big sheets of drawing paper what we know of where he actually is per year, and when more is known, maybe looking at over several months. Sometimes he was in New York, Cleveland, etc. And it's just to highlight, it's presences and absences of information, if I can refer to 1990s critical media analysis. There's a presence, what's put forward, and then there's an absence, things we don't know or not put forward. I'm interested in the absences, the current state of it, because that is a point for looking in terms of time frame for that. Because we want to know, because we're dealing with basic questions. Where was Philip Johnson and what was he doing? I mean, it's basic stuff for that. So in recap, we're talking about international travel information, mapping out a timeline, and a clearer sense of where he is and what he's doing for that. Now, as you look at this FBI report, you'll notice that it just sort of kicks off in 1940, which is probably strange if you're not so familiar with this scene. And here I'm referring to my knowledge out of Southern California, where a similar thing happens with it. In general, with lots of possible specificities, specific examples countering it, the FBI was focused on communists and not so much on Nazi stuff. So what happened in Southern California was that the Office of Naval Intelligence was the place that was really collecting the information on Nazi for that. So that's kind of why we see him pop up in 1940, but there could be other stuff, maybe in Office of Naval Intelligence. I don't know for that. But just to highlight, if you're looking, well, why isn't the FBI on him in 36 or 38 even? But that's so what you're seeing in this is you're seeing a lot of accounts from 1940-41 where the accounts are 7 and 8 years earlier. Imagine if they had been on it earlier, we would have known a lot more, because they would have been watching him all along. Now, I want to pull up a couple of things with the FBI report that I found were unusual. All right, if we go to, again, there's a link to this FBI report at the bottom of the web page, of the YouTube page. So if we go to page 12 on the FBI report, and it's to the special agent in charge, a memorandum for the special agent in charge, dated 20 September 1940. And here we go. All right, so it's sort of PDF page, if you will, 12, but actually the document says memo for SAC, Special Agent in Charge, 62-6773. Now here are 4 files, or at least 3, Yeah, at least three that are not in this report as I understand it. You know, I'm going into looking a lot more closely at this report. These reports contain very dense information and lots of leads. So if we look at New York file, this is 1, 2, 3, 4th paragraph. New York file 65-2283. Reading right what it says, states that Philip Johnson is a social justice writer, pro-Nazi and pro-fascist. Well, I don't see that in this report immediately. Maybe it's in here. But if it's not, then that should be ordered from the FBI Freedom of Information Act request process. And then there's another one, New York file 65-3815, bulk CELTSAT information by Ms. Marie Mitchell. It says bulk. By Ms. Marie Mitchell, that Philip Johnson is an artist connected with this communist group. Well, I don't know. I don't think of him as with communist. I didn't see anything with that. Maybe they're confusing it with, I don't know, maybe a Huey Long orientation or something like that. But there's another file that I don't see in this. And the New York file 653927 sets out information by Lieutenant Carcella here of the ONI, the Office of Naval Intelligence, to the effect that Philip Johnson is a pro-Nazi suspected of being a spy. All right. So we've got, and then there's another one which I think says that it's featured in this memorandum. So, but I would pull it just to make sure of that. So there's 4th file for that. So I suppose that I would just put this in there and query the FBI declassified record section, or maybe bring this, and if they don't, maybe ask them if they have it, or they would direct you to NARA, the National Archive, if it's over there. But that seems to suggest that there was reporting earlier, or reporting on intelligence reporting on Johnson. So that covers that. Now let's move to the last one. Yeah, okay, so this is page 2. It's really page 1 of this FBI file. And this is where it kicks off. This presumably is how Johnson gets on the radar of the FBI. But remember, we're going into 1940, so they're paying more attention to it. But this is what triggers these investigations. And it's dated 23rd of May, 1940, memorandum for Mr. E.A. Tam. And if we look at the top of this, it says, Victor Taylor, attorney in the Antitrust Division, referred to me from the director's office. He had with him one redacted name who had some information concerning a Philip Johnson, who was alleged to be engaged in certain Nazi activities in New York City. All right. Now, oh, okay, and let's go further. Johnson resides in New York. I'm summarizing that. He is the son of a prominent citizen who formerly lived at Cleveland, Ohio, and who was at one time president of the White Sewing Machine Company. All right? Now, I got to check the name if it's the White Sewing Machine, but it is a sewing machine company. That's one of the companies that Homer had a high-level interest in. It says here he's the president. I'm not sure he was the president, maybe a director or something, and for that, but he had something to do with it. And that was, I recall, and this will come out in the later talks because I'll look at the thing. That is a client. That company was a client of Charles Bedaux. Now, if you don't know who Charles Bedaux is, please go back to the first thing, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about him here for that. So it's interesting that they mention this. All right. So we have attorney in the Antitrust Division. This is the division that's looking at, I don't exactly know their full remit. All right. But they were definitely looking at companies in this business sphere, general business sphere. Certainly by 1940, they're starting to look at American company relationships to German company relationships, which can be problematic. All right, and that's in other literature. That's in the Nazi business literature, which I will point to for that. I recall that, as I mentioned, that Bedaux was an industrial management consultant to this company, maybe early on. But I find it wildly interesting that this is mentioned. This is mentioned here. All right. So Victor Taylor. So what would be the ideal next step here? Well, who is Victor Taylor? What is he looking at, particularly around this date, in the antitrust division? Now, it's speculation at this point, but maybe it's the business sphere around Philip's father for that. I mean, it mentions the sewing machine company. And then he had significant stock in Alcoa. All right, so how do so this is kind of a key thing for that this is going, this came from the business sphere. So, but it also could come from New York. So we're not going to know until we dive into Victor Taylor and what he was looking at for this. All right. So let me see here. All right. Now I'd like to focus on Charles Bedaux for this, to highlight how serious and dangerous some of this activity was. All right, so in the first talk, I mentioned how Charles Bedaux took the Duke and Duchess of Windsor to meet Hitler, and then he wanted to bring them to the United States to meet all these CEOs across the United States. And Charles Bedaux was an industrial management consultant, one of the first, and he had apparently a book in that sphere says he had 500 clients. And because of the nature of the work, he knew a lot about the companies, and he apparently knew a lot about the leaders in the companies. And some of them are trading with Germany. So Charles Bedaux, okay, he was French American. He started his company. It became multinational very quickly. He started out of Cleveland. He moves to France. He's French American. He was France, then he went to America, then he went back. He has lots of money. He buys a chateau, and he allows the wedding of the Duke and Duchess of Windsor to take place in his castle in Condé for that. You can look that up, or you could see photos of that, and you could see photos of Edward and Wallace with Charles and his wife Fern, who was from, I recall, Grand Rapids, Michigan, for that. All right? So then we have more Cleveland going on with this. All right? So who shows up at the chateau to meet with Wallace, I think within a couple of months before this wedding? The Cleveland socialite, Aileen Winslow, Mrs. Lawrence Lanier-Winslow. And so that is all detailed in a book of letters by Wallace to her, to I think her friend or her aunt or something, and it talks about, Eileen's here. All right, so yeah. So what happens with Charles Bedaux is he's in international business, and it can be tricky as countries change and everything else when you've got your entities in different places, and they want to maybe take them over. So there were lots of battles. So he was working with Germany, but battling with them. Like, they took away his company, then they go into Holland and they want to take away that company, and it's all very complicated. So from a business standpoint, it's really complicated how you get things out or navigate through this and try to do this ethically. For ethical folks for that. And if they're not so ethical, well, you can imagine what happens. So Bedaux ends up, I think it's 43. He's in North Africa. He gets captured by American forces for this because he's considered a traitor, and he knows a lot about Nazi business and activities as well as international business for this. And he gets brought back to America. And he's turning by this time, or as one sees that this happens, that they turn away from it when sometimes earlier on, but often when they have to. So he's turning away, and he's going to give all this information to the Americans for this. And his papers went missing in military custody. So he's got papers on all of these people including a lot of American businessmen and others. And those papers go missing. And he ends up, quote, committing suicide in jail, in a Miami jail, in 1944. And doesn't this sound like something familiar? So this is to highlight that this was a dangerous time. You can imagine being hesitant on giving some information at times if you're around this or in this. And that is the overall context of what Philip Johnson and others were around for that. So that's to highlight that. All right, so that's the end of the second part. And if you are interested in this discussion, please like and subscribe. Thank you for your time.